Okay, hello everyone.
Hello.
Rob, give us an intro.
Hello, Tank fans, and welcome to Totally Tanked, the tankiest podcast in Tankville. And today, John, on 10th of September, 2022, we have episode 37, and we are doing the 76mm gun motor carriage M18, or the M18 GMC, also known as the
Hellcat.
The Hellcat, yes.
Yes.
It's not a tank, it's a tank destroyer, but we don't care. It looks like a good tank.
It has tracks, it has
tracks.
armour, it has a weapon. It's a tank.
It's a tank. Well, it's not a tank.
It's all dependent whether you're prescriptivist or constructivist.
And the role it has. So, with the we've also got a number of other things to talk about this podcast. First off, guess where we've been, John?
We've been to a tank festival, but I think maybe we should do the big news of the week first.
Okay.
Yes, so the Colonel-in-Chief of the Royal Tank Regiment, and we think the Royal Australian Armoured Corps and many other armoured regiments throughout the world has passed away. Also the Queen of Australia and some other places. Quite a lot of other places. Yes, we're not going to do too much on that because...
But there'll be some lieutenants in various armoured battalions that'll be doing their drills at the moment, marching up and down the square in preparation for...
jumping on a plane.
Jumping on a plane to go participate in various ceremonies.
They are lucky, though, because when it comes to hauling the gun carriage with the coffin on it, that's the Royal Navy's job. No one else is allowed.
The senior service.
Anyway, a lot of history, not tank related. We won't go into that now. But I guess the Queen is dead. Long live the King. It feels very weird having a king.
Yep. It's going to be a lot of paperwork, symbolic changes for a lot of things in the military here in Australia, and a lot of documents, I guess. And
I believe there's
our money.
There's a very slightly different crown that has to go on all the uniforms. It's a more standy-uppy crown versus the Queen's crown, which is more flattened. And on that note, the money just changes over next year when they start issuing new coins. They're not changing anything that's already out there.
Yep.
And just as you could still use... Oh, no, because we went decimal in the 60s. So you can't use old pre-Queen money, but you could have... yeah, that's fine.
Anyway, now we're talking about the Hellcat.
Yeah, we are. Now, it's a controversial vehicle.
Well, yes, it was. It was controversial in its time. It's controversial whether or not it did the thing it was supposed to do. And
Steven Zaloga thinks it was a very bad vehicle.
Well,
and who are we to argue with Steven Zaloga? Well, we're going to try.
we're going to argue with a lot of people.
We'll argue with anyone.
Especially after one of these. All right, to keep it simple, we'll start off with some nice, easy facts and figures. It was built from July 1943 to October 1944, only by the Americans. Only by the US of A.
By the Buick imprint of General Motors.
Yes, it's actually classified. Some people have shown up with a Hellcat to Buick car shows and said this is a 1944 Buick. Thank you very much, or a 1943, and they've entered it in and won car shows with that.
I'd award the prize for that.
Just as a side note, they do sell for over $250,000 these days.
That's quite cheap for a World War II fighting vehicle. I mean, the German ones go for like 10 million and stuff like that.
Well, I was just looking at the way the Centurions and the other things go.
Yeah.
They go much cheaper than that.
They do.
So.
Let's talk about what it is first. So, very thin armour, only 20 millimetres pretty much all around. Open top.
25 on the front of the turret.
Yep.
And 12 everywhere else. 12.
Okay, very little armour. Open turret. So, like, it's got a turret, but it doesn't have a roof on the turret, which has some pros and cons we'll get into. And incredibly fast, because it was built light, but with a very powerful, I would say, 76mm gun, the same gun that the later model Shermans had. Mm-hmm. And we are now going to talk about the fun of American tank destroyer doctrine.
I don't know, we're going to still stick with the stats.
You tell me what you want to go with. Okay.
2,500 made, all right. However, only 500 deployed into theatre. So, sorry, they're all deployed over there, but only seem to be 500 used. A number of them. They were planning on building 7,400, but didn't end up building them all because of changes to policies.
They literally didn't have jobs for the ones they had, and they said 2,000 dishes enough.
They didn't. They thought the gun was too small. They changed the policy, going back towards towed guns for the anti-tank role, and nobody from the Lend-Lease side of the house wanted any of them. So the UK and the Russians the USSR, Soviets had been provided a couple to look at and evaluate, and they said, no, we don't need these. It's got a fast 3-speed gearbox, so it could do up to 89/90 kilometres an hour on road, which is still the fastest American fighting vehicle, I think. Even the M1 struggles to get to that. So
it was
fast.
It is blistering fast today. It was unbelievably fast in World War II. When we get into Doctrine, we'll talk about why they made it that fast.
42 kilometres an hour off-road, so still pretty quick. One reverse speed, could still do up to 32 k's an hour in reverse, so that's pretty good. As John said, it's had a 76mm gun and 150 cal in a ring mount on the turret, so not even didn't have a coax, didn't have a bow gunner or anything like that. 5 crew, including an alternate driver with controls. So he wasn't just
no swapping over at brakes or anything.
It was just a case of, so if you wanted to drive for 24 hours, you could have the driver going, and then you could swap over to the alternate driver with nobody getting out, nobody stopping. So it's a bit of a changeover for the the crew roles that they had in the tanks at this stage, where they had 5. But some people were saying that you didn't really need that 5th guy as the alternate driver, but they had them.
I got to say, we'll talk about our tank festival experiences, but having seen the physical toll of driving these things on the drivers, I have a new admiration for being able to swap that roll over. Yeah.
45 rounds of the ammunition inside the tank, so 9 inside the turret and another 18 in two sponsons, so 18 on each side.
Notionally capable of 20 rounds a minute, so that's all over very quick.
And so quick firing. The turret could traverse in 24 seconds.
Power-assisted traverse.
Power-assisted traverse. 160k range on road. It was slightly cheaper than the Sherman. As I say, it's but they probably wanted it cheaper. It was one of the ideas was that it was going to be a cheaper vehicle, but it was slightly cheaper than the Sherman, but not as cheap as they probably.
But in terms of essential resources, being the cannon and the engine, it was basically, and this is where the criticism of the concept comes in, eating up the same resources pipeline as the Sherman.
Yes, but they also provided a lot of commonality. And
it was built in a different factory, and we're going to get into a lot of the pros and cons there. Yeah.
Now, let's talk about your Doctrine, John.
Yes. So, the Americans, particularly in 1940, looked at what the Germans had been doing and said, my God, we need something that can counter a massive armoured thrust, as particularly had occurred in France, but also Poland, also to some extent in Spain. And they quite sensibly, for 1940, came up with the concept of a whole tank destroyer corps that would sit in reserve and wait for the German armoured thrust, and then be able to move extremely quickly to outflank and counter that thrust, which is all very sensible looking at the way the war was working in 1940.
Correct. And however, they didn't bring these tanks in until 1943, 1944.
Well, America wasn't in the war until very late 1941 either.
Yes.
So
they had, and look, they'd gone through a couple of other different tanks and concepts in order to try and achieve this goal. Whether it was towed anti-tank guns, then they mounted them into
trucks and half-tracks.
Trucks and half-tracks. And eventually they said, no, we want a tracked vehicle that can go fast.
And then there was a number of tank destroyers that were basically just modified Shermans.
Which is your M10.
Yeah. And the 36, I believe, was upgrading of that.
M36 was had the 90mm gun placed in the turret for the M10, which they tried. Anyway, we'll get on.
But the point was that this was... And this is moving reasonably quickly. From 1940, identifying a whole new type of vehicle you're going to need, to using stopgap vehicles to meet the Doctrine up until 43, and then in 43 they finally get the vehicle that was envisaged. And there's no one else in the world could do it any faster than that from having a requirement to delivery.
No. Look, the way it was supposed to be organised is they would have a battalion of tank destroyers held at the divisional level within the US Army, and they would then, if any sort of outbreak of enemy forces, enemy tanks was detected, that battalion could then be sent rapid fire into a blocking and or flanking position of that enemy thrust, and basically stop it, slow it, and then allow you to reorganise your own infantry division or tank division around that thrust in order to counter it and stop it. So basically they were there to put out the fire before it managed to spread too far, so they were seen as a firefighting activity of being able to get there quickly and do the job. However, what they found is because when they did enter the war with the tank destroyers, there weren't any major thrusts by the Germans at that stage, and so
Well, there was one, but we'll get to that.
we'll get to that. That was at the beginning of their entry into Europe. There were no German armoured thrusts happening, and so rather than have a resource that looked like a tank, had some armour, had a big gun, and what else are we going to do with it? They decided, right, rather than holding a battalion of these tank destroyers at the divisional level, we're going to penny packet them out into company and or platoon levels to the various infantry battalions in order to support the infantry. Now, they weren't great at supporting the infantry, which is why a lot of people looked at them and said, hey, you're not actually doing a very good job, because your open tops, you aren't very good at urban warfare in support of infantry, because you're open topped, which makes them very susceptible to infantry and or sniper fire or grenades.
But I mean, normally a tank is an insoluble problem to most infantry, but an open top tank, you just need to get a grenade somewhere near the top of it.
Or somebody in a clock tower.
Someone in a clock tower.
Bell tower shooting down inside.
Or a mortar, or anyway, there are a lot more options if the vehicle's open top. But having said all that, you have this constant issue that when people are devising armoured doctrine, it's all about slashing manoeuvre and lots of high-end warfighting concepts. And the reality for pretty much all armoured vehicles all the time is that what they end up doing is trundling along with the infantry and shooting hard targets.
Yeah, but the point is...
But no one wants them to do that, but that's kind of where most of them end up.
The issue comes is that if there had have been any sort of armoured thrust at any of these points where the tank destroyer battalions have been broken up into these penny packets, reorganising them and getting them to the place.
Oh, it would have been useless. They wouldn't have been. Yeah.
But it's the opportunity cost of, okay, I would like to have something in support of my infantry as they go through this small Italian town, but all my Shermans are committed somewhere else. But I've got these other armoured vehicles that could go and help this company of infantry go through this small village. I'm going to send them over there, rather than saying, no, they have to be held in case of emergency, which is realistically what they should have been held for. But the emergencies didn't happen. They kept on not happening, and everybody said, we're going to use them to fill the gaps that we have right now, rather than hold on to them for an emergency that may or may not happen.
Yeah, but this is fundamentally why armies eventually, kicking and screaming, moved away from having dedicated vehicles for every minute role possible, and instead saying what you need is an all-round vehicle that can be used in, this is your jack of trades, master of none sort of trade-off, but it's still fundamentally better to have a standard competent vehicle rather than a whole bunch of niche vehicles that are never in the place you need them for the mission.
Now, my big takeaway from my initial big takeaway from this tank destroyer, John, was it was an idea that arrived half a war too late. So yes, it would have been very good deployed right at the beginning of, as you said, in France, where they could send a battalion of these tank destroyers along to counter any sort of blitzkrieg attack as it's charging through Belgium and the Ardennes down into France.
But, I mean, as a what if, I mean, it's a completely meaningless what if, because the vehicle didn't exist in 1940 and it was only created because of the events of 1940. But let's say you got a time machine and you transport a battalion of M18s back into 1940. The German offensives would have ground to a incredible halt, because these things would have been moving so quickly to respond to them, assuming you've got your command and control in place.
And you've got some air parity going on, which the French didn't. Realistically, the French and the English did not have air parity.
Sure, but things like, I think it was at Arras where the Matildas counterattacked. If that had been M18s instead of Matildas, the 88s wouldn't have had time to deploy.
No, and the 88s wouldn't have. If you're not coming along straight up the road and you're actually deploying on the flanks of some of these vehicles and troops in the open, because it did have an HE round. It wasn't a great HE round, but it did have one, unlike the Matildas. Yeah. It would have done some significant damage to stop the blitzkrieg.
But this is, in some ways, it's a fun counterfactual. At some points, it's as pointless as saying, what if you had a battalion of M1 Abrams in 1940? Because it just didn't exist in 1940.
No. But the thing is, the other point of it all is that the previous doctrine of anti-tank doctrine was to have all your anti-tank weapons up on the front line, have a nice thin line whereby it was your anti-tank guns were spread all along the front line, the Maginot Line and Belgium and everywhere else. But as soon as any sort of force got past that, they were out in the open, and those anti-tank guns, because they were towed, could never redeploy to actually take out any sort of action against them. And if you'd done the same things with your M18s and had them all sitting on the front line, they would have been just as pointless as a towed anti-tank gun, realistically. So you had to have the doctrine and employ the doctrine as well as the equipment at the same time. So
yeah, and then it raises the interesting point of that the command and control is actually more important than the much as we love talking about tanks, it's what we do, but no one's we're certainly not going to do a podcast about the evolution of command and control on the battlefield, mostly because it's really dry and also quite hard to get good information on, but there's always more stuff about the rivets, so
we like rivets now.
Yeah, but my point being simply that if the French had been better in 1940 at controlling their forces
and not fighting the last war,
but things like demanding that orders be delivered written by hand by a motorcycle courier rather than using new technology, things like that, where French armoured divisions were sitting doing nothing useful while hard fighting was happening over the next hill because they just lacked the structures to get them to the fight when they needed to be. Now, there were numerous other problems with the French at that time, but simply having the M18s there, it also would require a modern system of command to actually get them where they need to be when they need to be.
All right, so some other issues with the M18. Being open tops had some benefits, but one of the issues with it meant it was very cold during the winters of the winter of 44, early 45. So, and...
Oh, the poor tank destroyers. They're cold. Not having to walk anywhere. It's cold when you don't have to use your little leggies, isn't it?
Well, the Shermans had their heaters, didn't they?
Yeah, and the heated crew suits as well. But I'm just, I look at the M18 and I think, if I had to go to war, there are worse ways to go than an M18. They also had the best kill ratio of any American vehicle in the war, so which Zaloga will say was, well, it was because they had superior training, not that the vehicle was better. And so I'm not sure about that. But,
well, they had superior training on killing tanks, is the point.
Yeah.
It says, whereas the tanks had superior training at driving tanks and supporting the infantry, the tank destroyer battalions had superior training in destroying tanks and actually deploying and firing and hitting the weak spots and so forth, whereas the Sherman crews were not trained for that. They learned it the hard way, but they weren't
specialised. They
weren't trained actually how to kill tanks. They were trained to support infantry.
I would say though that of all the ways you can go to a world war where your chances of dying are extremely high, the M18 with its open top, zipping along with a bunch of friends, wind in your hair, no colder than everyone else in an unheated vehicle.
No, it was colder because so whatever heat was inside the
the radial engine sucks a lot of air through,
and sucked any warmth inside the tank into the engine. So it actually made it colder than outside because basically it turned it into a refrigerator as it sucked all the warm air into the engine.
Chuck on a jumper, Buttercup.
Other things with the M18, they had an automatic transmission as the Torque-matic, which is what gave it the high torque and acceleration and the ability to just put your foot down and take off. And so it had the three. When we say it had 3 speeds. 3-speed gearbox, it was just all automatic, so you put your foot down and it would go from 0 to 16 miles an hour. I'll go miles now.
It was a Buick.
And they took it through all the standard Buick car testing as it came out of the factory to say, yep, does this all work?
Yeah,
and so
and I would also note the name Hellcat was because it was coming out of a car manufacturer, and they were saying this thing's going to have a cool name.
Yeah, this is true. They say, well, we've got to get our brand recognition out there. So, whereas everybody else was going M4s, M18s, and M2s,
all the good old American designation, motor gun carriage, 52B.
Well, as we say, gun motor 76mm gun motor carriage is what they call it. To go with the idea of the tank destroyer doctrine, you use the idea of they're not there to take on an armoured thrust head on. They don't go charging towards enemy tanks, guns blazing. No, what they do is they let the enemy tanks keep driving forward, and they move up on the flanks of the enemy tanks and then shoot them in the sides. And that's the whole point of being able to get around the side. The whole point of the speed of the M18 is to be able to get around the sides of the enemy thrust and then shoot them in the sides where the armour is weak. And their guns are not pointing because the German turrets...
Very slow.
Very slow. And so if you could come up over the side of a very small ridge or decline of some sort and stick your barrel over the top of it, with your 20 degrees elevation and 10 degrees depression on your gun, stick your turret, and you've got great visibility of being open topped, and you can put in, if you can get off, remember they can fire up to 20 rounds a minute, so 3 rounds in the first 10 seconds type thing, going into the side of any tank.
And the American 76, as used in the later model Shermans, was a very powerful anti-tank gun. Now, there's this criticism of the M18 in that it wasn't powerful enough to one-shot a Tiger or a Panther through the glasses plate.
From the front.
Yeah.
But the point is...
Not much was.
You don't want taking on those things from the front. You want them hitting them from the side so that their guns aren't pointing at you. That's where you come up, as I was saying, you come up... Within 10 seconds, you've got 3 rounds going into the sides of these things, and no Panther or Tiger is going to survive 3 rounds going into the side of it from a 76mm high-velocity gun. Also,
we need to talk about the HVAP ammunition. We can do that later.
Yep.
Yes.
And so that was all part of the doctrine of, the way the crews were trained is you go up and you get the, and while your German tanks are trying to slew their tank around and turn the turret in order to bring their guns to bear, you've already pissed off. You've already reversed back or driven forwards if you want to do that into or out of cover, and you're out of line of sight. And that's the way the doctrine and the training of the Hellcats was based around. So you don't be there to be shot at again. And
it's really worth noting that often when if they say, oh, you need to manoeuvre the tank fast to get around the sides, if the 2 tanks are roughly the same speed, that's very hard to do, and you've got a problem with that, trying to turn faster to get around the sides of your opponent. They're on an interior turn. But this thing was so fast, and its turret traverse was so fast, it could actually do it, which most other vehicles couldn't reliably do that.
And your rate of fire was so fast. Look, the open-topped. Now, that was as a blessing and a curse. So we've talked about the curse whereby you were very susceptible for any sort of fragmentation, grenades, snipers, anything else made you vulnerable in urban environments.
Tasman in the chat points out Molotov cocktails, which is a very good point.
Yep. Did the Germans have their own version of Molotovs?
Well, petroleum in a glass bottle
did they call it something else? Like
I'm sure they didn't call it a Molotov.
A Ribbentrop cocktail. There you go, a Ribbentrop cocktail.
Yeah, but yeah, just any sort of incendiary which can be produced from, frankly, a bottle of rum. Although that's probably a waste of rum.
Yeah. You get more fight out of your troops if you just let them drink it.
Yeah. Well. Depends how the tank chocolate's going. Yeah.
Anyway, so as we're saying, the open-topped version
Gives a lot of visibility.
yeah, and that was the whole point of having an open-top tank. And the American tank destroyers were all open-topped in order to increase that visibility and that combat awareness of and situational awareness of what's out there, what's there, and being able to see everything. So you could not lock yourself down and go and blind yourself. You had to be heads up and always scanning and always looking, and you always had better visibility than the other guy, even if you were far more vulnerable. And because you're far more vulnerable, you did tend to take more less risky choices because but you could take those because you had better visibility and knew what you were getting into. But it did mean that you couldn't use the overall speed as well as so. I guess there's a difference between strategic, operational, and tactical speed. They could probably use the tactical speed very well because they were just moving around small areas and having that awareness and being able to accelerate fast and reverse and move around.
It was a very reliable tank though, so it was incredibly fast on a strategic scale as well.
Correct, but it's the operational speed is where I'm talking about. Saying if you do need to move to get into an ambush position, the move from your strategic area, which might be a road where you basically gone to, you've driven up a road for 40 k's, you've all gotten together, your company commander has told you, okay, we're going to go through these woods and we're going to line up on this ridge line. The move from the road to that ridge line through those trees, that's where your operational speed would you cut right down because you're having to watch where you're going and making sure you're not driving into a ditch, you're not running into trees, you're whatever else. That's where it's the engine was very good. Its ground, its manoeuvrability was very good through the mud and the snow. Was actually very good.
Well, it was only 20 tons with pretty much the running gear and the engine of a Sherman, so that makes for a very nimble vehicle.
So when we were talking about the engine, it was the Radial 9 engine. The same.
We should have it coming up on the screen behind us at some point in the slideshow.
So it started out with a 350 horsepower Radial 9, and then that got up to the 400 horsepower. So for what's designed for the Sherman, which is 30 something tons, running around in a 20-ton tank, so it was much faster because of that. One of the big things with the engine and the supportability of the engine was, before I go into the supportability, I'll talk about. So when you look at a Sherman, John, how tall is it compared to a Hellcat?
Much taller.
And yet they had this, and the whole reason the Sherman was so tall was because of the Radial 9 engine sitting in the back and providing the power. And yet the
Buick managed to do it in a much smaller vehicle.
And that's exactly right. And so it was the so much lower due to the gearbox lowered the drive shaft in the front of the engine instead of where the M4, the drive shaft going straight through the hull to the crankshaft off the transmission at the front. So that was a thing that I had never heard of. Realising that, yes, there is a huge difference in height. That's about a metre of height difference between the two. Being able to lower that down makes a huge... I guess not having a turret, a turret roof...
it's a couple of inches, but
but it's still a thing. So, but yeah, it's just one of those things of saying, wow, it does. They've really engineered it well for that. And
I have had a few angry commenters over the years point out that a significant number of Shermans didn't even use a radial engine, but were still stuck with the tall design because that was what it was built into.
There you go.
Yeah, you could make an argument that if you took the Hellcat design and up-armoured it and put a heavier turret. I mean, they did later in the war figure out that they could armour the top of the turret for only an extra ton of weight.
Now, when they're talking about putting an armoured top on, they still kept basically it wasn't an enclosed turret. They kept a gap of about 6 inches, so the commander could still stick his head out, look around. So it's still not enclosed. But it is an armoured roof in order to stop shrapnel coming in from above. And snipers and
the commanders weren't thrilled about having their heads exposed either. There were a lot of opposition to that, particularly to use the 50 cal. They basically had to stand up in the turret and make themselves the world's biggest target for everyone around.
The 50 cal was designed for anti-aircraft use, not for anti-infantry, because the whole point is
you're not fighting infantry.
You shouldn't be fighting infantry. You're not there in an infantry support role, even though it was deployed that way. But that makes yeah, and again, lack of good HE meant they're not equipped to support infantry in urban combat, and so going to only play a limited role there.
Yeah, I mean, no worse than a Sherman with a 76, though. Yeah, it wasn't as good as the lower velocity 75, which was a much better high explosive round.
But again, but they weren't designed for that, and so that was. And one of the other ones that I came across that made me think about. So you've got the 50 cal in the ring, in the flexible ring mount. Means the commander cannot realistically bring the 50 cal to bear in a infantry support role. Didn't have a coax or a bow gun. So it's not designed to provide infantry support, because both of those things are weapons to be used in support of to take out infantry, and whereby a lot of the times, if there were infantry around tanks, they would just button themselves up, look at each other with their coaxes. If there was any infantry around the other one tank would shoot at the other one and just lay into any infantry around, knowing that their rounds wouldn't hurt anybody inside their friendly tank. And same the other way. But tank destroyers couldn't do that so they didn't have the option, but they also couldn't do it. So it's taking away. It's not really is forcing them down. You are going down this path, and this is the only role you should be playing. And having generals basically saying, no, I've got armoured vehicles lying around, I'm going to get them to do things for me.
Yeah. The light tank fallacy feeds into the British battlecruiser fallacy that if you've got a thing and it's big and it's got a big gun, the commanders want it to go out and do stuff. And they will get it to do stuff contrary to the doctrine it was built for, and the machine will then fail. And it will often kill a lot of its crew while it fails. And that's, in some ways, not a failing of the design of the machine when it's used in a way that's totally contraindicated. But then it comes to a point of just don't build machines that are going to get misused. And
make sure everybody understands this is what it's good for. Don't try and make it do anything else.
Yeah, but this is why you're better off having generalist vehicles, because when push comes to shove and the enemy is attacking or counter-attacking, and you've got some things that look like tanks sitting in the rear area doing nothing, you're going to get them up there doing tank things. And that's just simply unavoidable.
Now, they did use their high speed in order to provide some convoy protection and other activities like that, which was fine.
Well, I mean, if you're in a convoy and you've got a truck that can do 70 kilometres an hour maybe, you'd be thrilled to have an escort that can actually keep up with you.
Yeah.
Instead of an M4 Sherman. Having said that, and we spoke to Nicholas Moran, the Chieftain, about that just a couple of weeks ago, Rob. He was of the view that this was way too much vehicle for convoy protection, and he's probably right about that. But that was a case of finding uses for it, having shipped it to Europe, and then the Germans failing to make very many armoured thrusts. They did make one, and we are going to talk about
it. Two.
Yeah.
We'll get there. Look, other things I wanted to say about it. Let's get on to the engine and the maintenance. Again, I
love this.
Yeah, they put it on rails.
Now the funny thing is, a couple of years ago when I was working at the Australian War Memorial, we did a big 3D feature on the Bushmaster protected mobility vehicle, which is Australia's pride and joy of a vehicle we developed that's not bad, quite good in fact. But this was a vehicle designed in the 80s to 90s. And one of the big things was the engine's on rails, and you open up the bay, and the bay gives you more rails, and you can pull the engine out along the rails.
Basically, you unhook a few hoses and couplings and type thing, and then you can just slide the entire thing out.
So, but it for a very small bit of internal kit, you can make the engine massively serviceable and even replaceable without needing huge cranes in a workshop, which is a huge advantage. The thing is, we're still incredibly proud that our 90s designed vehicle has this feature, that the M18 Hellcat had in 1943.
Yes, and so not only on the engine at the front, whereby two people could open up a hatch at the rear, armoured hatch, and so it took a bit of work, and then 20 minutes worth of mucking around, unhooking all the various hoses that were connected to the engine. Once it was done, you could then slide the engine out on these rails and get to whatever part you wanted to do, and you could also do that for the, so you could remove and replace it if you needed, and you can also do it at the front for the drivetrain. It was a little bit more work there because you had to put the rails in, but once the rails were in place, you could then slide the drivetrain out as well. So again, it was very well built for that sort of speed.
This compares to equivalent German vehicles of the period where you had to have one of an incredibly rare number of 10-ton cranes that could lift the turret off to pull the
and possibly the top half of the hull.
Yeah,
and before you could get to anything to be able to do anything.
Yeah, it's they say logistics are how professionals fight wars, and this isn't quite logistics, but ease of maintenance is overlooked.
Maintenance comes under the gamut of logistics.
Yeah, sure. But certainly making it easy and removing the need to have a 10-ton crane is shouldn't be ignored. It's actually really, really important, and it brings the availability of your vehicles up from 10% up to I think 80% was what the M18 ran at a lot of the time.
Yeah, and look, because it was so light, it basically put a lot less stress and wear and tear on the vehicle. And to my mind, that's why I think it was much easier. And so the tanks, the M18s that are still surviving these days, you still see them running around at a huge clip now. Being at AusArmourFest the other week, all the 1940s version tanks that were going around there were going very sedately. But and I'm sure that's because they need to maintain them and everything else.
But none as sedately as the Panther.
Yeah, but again, those are all much heavier tanks, whereas the M18s I've seen online going around still fly around at huge speeds, and I think that's because the lower weight means they're much easier to maintain, and they can keep them going with their engines, and it doesn't hurt them as much to go at those sort of speeds and throw them around a bit.
I think we need to give credit to Buick for building a very fine vehicle to the specification asked of them. Now, we will explore in further depth as to whether it would have been a better use of industrial resources just to build more Shermans, and you could definitely make that argument, but the vehicle itself did everything that it was supposed to do, and it actually did it extremely well.
Yeah, I agree. It did it very, very well. The muzzle brake. So, started out without
I love a good muzzle brake discussion.
It does. Well, everybody's going to have a muzzle brake discussion.
Yeah.
So it started out without the muzzle brake, but being a ambush tank, ambush vehicle, and ambush is murder and murder is fun, as they say. Is what I say at any rate. And
the Australian Army seems to say it a lot.
Oh, mainly me. That's me.
Well,
I say.
Okay. You were in the Australian Army.
Yeah. But the muzzle brake, it started out without a muzzle brake, and what that would do is when they would firing from their ambush positions, it would throw up a huge cloud of the rounds going out to the barrel would throw up a huge.
The gas exhaust throws up the dirt. Yeah.
Yeah, and would obscure any vision. So the commanders then had to spend an extra 4 or 5 seconds waiting for the dust to settle before they could put the next rounds down.
And in every other tank, that's not a problem because the loader's still farting around.
Yeah,
in this tank, it fires so fast that they're like, yeah, come on.
Come on, I need to see, did that round hit? Did it move? Was it up? Was it down? Was it left? Was it right? Is it drop 100? Is it what they need to do? And so they had to have the muzzle brakes fitted so that they couldn't improve that visibility.
So it's a neat thing in that normally a muzzle brake is there as much to reduce recoil as anything else. M18 didn't need that.
But no, they did bring in recoil compensators because of the cramped conditions of the open top turret.
But the muzzle brake was primarily put on because it was diverting the exhaust gases from the engine. Instead of having it going in a 360 degree, not the engine, sorry, the gun. Instead of it being in a 360 degree arc, it was just in a two-dimensional blast, which having it set up that way also means that you're much less visible to enemy observers. In fact, it's a wonder why all muzzle brakes don't go that way, but they don't. They go in all sorts of ways. Anyway, it stopped the blast impacting the ground and meant that they had clearer view for secondary follow-on fire.
So the crew could then see, okay, that shot missed or that shot hit, put another one in exactly the same place, or whatever they need to do. Now, one of the issues with muzzle brakes is you have to be very careful with them on tanks around infantry, because any infantry beside them will then get hit by those explosive gases as they come out the sides of the muzzle brake, and will basically take their head off. But again, two things for the M18, the Hellcat, was that one, they weren't generally using being around infantry while they were doing this, and two, because the turret was open topped and the commander would be standing looking around, he had much more visibility and situational awareness to know whether or not there is any infantry in that blast danger zone, as it were. So again, it provided benefits not only to the crew but also to those in our support who might have been around them, which is something a lot of other tanks probably don't take in aware. Whether or not that was a design feature or whether or not that was just a happy circumstance, I am unsure. Effective gun sights sighting out to 4 kilometres or 2.5 miles, I think they said. But
what was the longest hit they ever actually managed?
I didn't see anything.
Yeah, I haven't seen any of that either, but I guarantee you it wasn't 4 kilometres.
No, there was plenty of them. They were basically 30 metres away, out of the fog. There was a panther.
Well, that was once, but that was it. That was a good one.
So that was the 18th of September in 1944 in France, near Moncourt, where a company of M18 tank destroyers came across the counterattack of the first armoured counterattack by the Germans onto Patton's Third Army as it was coming up to the Moselle, I think it was. I want to say northeast
the important point here is everyone is down on the open top. No one likes it in armoured vehicle. Does anyone looks at this open top problems? But it was because of the open top and having their heads waving in the breeze that they, even at 30 metres range in the fog, acquired the enemy before the enemy acquired them. And the M18s, you would think for a tank destroyer, closing to within 30 metres would be a really bad idea with enemy tanks. The Germans should have monstered them. But it really went the other way. The M18s hopped and jumped around and did a number on them, and part of the fantastic kill-loss ratios of this vehicle came out of this battle. And that comes down to the situational awareness of the open top. I am not saying tanks today should have open tops. I'm not even...
No, they have much more better sensors than the Mark 1.
They do have better sensors, but I see the merit in the argument of saying American resources would have been better spent building more Shermans in World War II than M18s. I see that. Having said that, you have to acknowledge that when the M18 got in the thick of things, the features it was designed with did actually work.
Yes, yeah. And so in that battle, you had 39 tanks, German tanks, knocked out for the loss of 4 M18s over the next 3 days within the fog, because that was the only time the Germans could carry out any sort of armoured activities, because the
air superiority.
In fact,
damn those planes.
Even prior to that attack, quite a number of the German tanks have been taken out because they'd been spotted by Allied airplanes and been bombed to hell. So they only had about 20% of their actual armoured force available for the counterattack that they were carrying out. So there could have been 4 times as many tanks coming through for those M18s to find in the fog, but there weren't. So, with the HVAP.
Oh, with HVAP. I love this.
High velocity
armour piercing.
Armour piercing, sorry, yes, not anti. Armour piercing. So, John?
Okay, I love this because it is the perfect bridge between early war design and today's armour-piercing fin-stabilised discarding sabot. So they had the brilliant idea that if they put an aluminium casing around a tungsten rod then they could get the full muzzle velocity of the charge in the gun and fire it out of the gun really fast. And then when it hit the enemy tank, it would shed the aluminium casing and penetrate the tank. And when HVAP was used, this all worked exactly as it was supposed to. The problem was that tungsten was and remains extremely rare and expensive, and it was quite unusual for tanks to have, American tanks to have many of these rounds, if any at all.
Three at most type thing. It's like, it's a premium round that you have to spend a lot of gold on, essentially.
But considering the vanishingly small number of encounters with tigers or panthers on the Western Front, it wasn't actually that bad. But the interesting thing in terms of broader tank ammunition development was that they quickly figured out that having this aluminium casing, which is low weight, around the penetrator created drag. So as in longer ranges, it lost its velocity and it wasn't as good. And the solution to this little problem was to basically have your aluminium casing peel off once it's out of the barrel, and that's your discarding sabot.
Right, okay.
So HVAP becomes discarding sabot in the future. But at the time, an M18 with its 76mm gun, if it had the HVAP, was extremely dangerous to all German armour in existence.
From the front.
Yeah.
From the sides, any of the M18s were dangerous.
Yeah.
But,
and if there had been more big cats on the Western Front, they would have taken tungsten from other things and put it into HVAP. The lack of that ammunition was fundamentally a reflection of the lack of heavy German armour.
Yeah.
In that front.
Yeah. And look, talking about being able to take out the Panthers, I think there was one sergeant of commander of an M18 with 6 shots took out 5 Panthers. I'm pretty sure it was at Moncourt, but it might have been in one of the other various battles around those areas in northeast France. So
I mean, Tasman has pointed out, and he's correct, the very first use was Anzio
yes.
in Italy. It was not popular, it didn't do well, it was not a theatre.
The Americans didn't do very well in Italy.
Neither did the British, but
nobody did very well
yeah,
there.
the Italians certainly didn't. The Germans weren't too happy about it either. It wasn't
There was a lot of plans that of what people were going to do in Italy, and nobody followed them, and it all went bad for everybody.
But fighting your way out of a bridgehead is not what the M18 was designed for.
No, it was, and it was used as
beachhead. Yeah.
Beachhead. It was also, there was so many problems with the way the Americans deployed it to Anzio. Anyway,
Yes.
All right. Now,
So when we talk about the Battle of the Bulge?
I think we'll talk about the Battle of the Bulge now.
Excellent.
Now,
so finally, the Germans have an armoured breakout. Hooray!
Yes, the U-boats have said it's going to be foggy, bad weather from the 16th of December, 1944.
So none of those nasty planes ruining everything for tanks.
So for the next month, we can have armoured superiority in the, and we're going to cut through to Antwerp from, and cut off the Allied armoured forces as they head north through Belgium, Holland, and Luxembourg. But how did it go?
Well, to quote Ian M. Banks, it was a very good battle and they almost won.
I can't wait till you get to that one. That is my favourite line, all right? Because it was only at the end of the book I say, that's what that meant. Oh, I love that.
Okay, we're talking about Ian M. Banks's book, Use of Weapons, which I recommend to everyone.
And that line is really important.
Yeah. But, so the point was that the Germans actually managed to get fuel and they made quite a good assault. They didn't almost win. That I'm not claiming that. It was just because it was a good quote. But things did go their way quite well at the start. There were, armoured. There were divisional headquarters fleeing for the channel. Things went very badly for the Allies.
Communications. So Send 3 and 4pence. We're going for a dance.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't what it was said, but it was a case of there was bad communications within the American lines of, are we staying or are we going? I think you should stay. No, did you say we're staying? Okay, and then they all got captured.
Yeah, but also, I mean, it's worth noting Patton performed a staff work genius in redirecting the Third Army.
Huge distance, and basically said, right, get on the road and go, boys, and they did, and they actually had the support.
But the staff work involved in making that happen is mind-boggling.
Because clearing roads, getting the fuel there, getting everything happening is a huge effort of making the numbers work, and his team did that, and that was amazing.
But a significant part of being able to blunt this German advance and sort of, the German lion unleashed for a moment was
900 tanks, 900 armoured vehicles going through this area, and the Americans had about started off with not many, and Pat's come up with
Now, there were a few problems that the Germans had. One was that their big Jagdtigers kept collapsing bridges they were trying to get over, which really bollocks their operation, which comes down to the constant refrain of heavy tanks have significant costs. But also the M18s did manage to travel 100 kilometres in a very short period of time to block the Germans.
Let's go back to that thing about the Jagdtigers. So, while the Tigers, and there were Tigers in the Battle of the Bulge, were supposed to be the spearhead of the German advance, but of course they weren't. Because the commanders knew that there's no point sending a Tiger to forward as your lead vehicle that's going to get bogged, break down, or whatever else, and then block the road for everybody else behind him. So, what they did, they had the Panzer IVs going first, then the Panthers, then the Tigers, and everything, and then anything else behind that. That way, the Panzer IVs would definitely be able to get around whatever roads, bridges, or anything else that was in the way. The Panthers probably could navigate the environment in order to get to where the fighting needed to happen, and the Tigers, if they made it, would be able to do something right there and then. So that's why so while we all think about the Tigers leading the charge, no, they brought up the rears in order to not block the road when they broke down, or got disabled, or whatever.
Or collapse the bridge under their weight.
Yes.
Now,
I want to talk about Team Desabry. All right.
Okay.
I think it was Colonel or Major William Desabry.
Mm-hmm.
Now, on a totally different tangent. So when I went Googling for Team Desabry, which is, we'll get into that in a sec. There is a game called Bubble Ball, which is essentially indoor soccer played in a big Zorb type ball. So you're inside a Zorb.
How much have you had to drink? Okay, keep going. Don't let me just.
I was found this on YouTube, Bubble Ball, and you get inside this Zorb ball and you play indoor soccer, kicking the ball around, and it's full contact zorbing indoor soccer. And one of the teams is called Team Desabray from Lille in northern France.
Right.
And I found that, and I thought, oh, this is just absolutely cool. So Team Desabray is there was the he was one of the lead commanders. He was sent to the town north of Bastogne. So we're all going to talk about Bastogne, where the 101st and the 82nd and so forth holding that. But he went to the town just north of that, and he was to Neuville, and he was commanded to hold Neuville from the Germans as they were moving around. So they've arrived in the night. It's a very good talk from him in 1989, on YouTube, and he describes exactly as he's standing in the town saying, yep, the Germans were up there, we did this, and this, and he talks it all through. He does a great job of that, and I'd fully recommend watching that. But he was talking about how they arrived in the night, got into the town, and didn't realise there was high ground, a ridgeline all around them, and then the next morning they've gotten up and they're all the German tanks. So he's been there. He's been basically told that he's got 4 M18s with him to hold the town, and when the first assault comes in at 10 o'clock in the morning, the airborne and his tank infantry are able to repel them, and do such a good job of killing off the Panzer Grenadiers that when the next assault comes through at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the Panzer Grenadiers don't come in. Tanks go in by themselves, and because they come in without infantry support, his tank destroyers are able to have a field day, and that's why the tank destroyers absolutely wreck the armoured assault into Neuville on that day, on the to say it's the 19th of December. But yeah, I think it's the 19th of December. But
Battle of the Bulge, though. I mean,
yeah, it's all part of around the defence of Baston and the battle as part of the Battle of the Bulge.
but when talking about the M18, it's really important to note that this was pretty much the one occasion where
strategic speed.
Yeah, but also where the whole point that they were designed to counter these German armoured thrusts actually happened, and they traversed an enormous amount of distance extremely quickly and performed their role. And you can't blame the vehicle that it was possibly... it wasn't even short-sighted. In 1940, it was entirely sensible to plan for countering German armoured thrusts.
After you'd seen what had happened to a number of other countries.
Yeah, the Poles and the French in particular. So it worked, and it did its job when it was called on to do it. I get in this argument in naval circles quite often that the British had this... I'll do this quickly, I promise. This naval doctrine of
but it's not as fun as Bubble Ball.
Yeah, of using torpedo bombers to slow the enemy fleet so that they could be brought under the guns of the battleships. And critics say, "Oh, it only worked twice," and it's like, "Hang on, it worked twice." and in a war, you're lucky if your set pieces come off once. In sport, you're lucky if your set pieces come off once. So
tell that to the Wallabies.
Yeah, in this case,
they would love to have their set pieces come off.
The Australian rugby team for our American listeners. Okay, so the point was it worked. Now, also chatting to Mr. Moran a couple of weeks ago, he did raise the point that yes, it worked, but it's entirely possible that the same number of M4s in the same position could have covered that distance and had the same effect and been more all-round useful throughout the war.
He was only saying that as a what if, though. He was fully supportive of the M18s and their role in that regard.
Well, I think the issue is that they were the result of a entirely sensible evaluation of need in 1940.
Yes.
Okay, so they said we have to be able to counter armoured advances. Made an enormous amount of sense in 1940. What is the vehicle we need to do that? M18 is basically developed to be a proper application of those ideas, whereas all the other vehicles were half measures. Okay, so they get the M18, and then by the time it gets there, the enemy is basically beaten. It just doesn't know it yet, so it's not making the armoured thrust that it was built to counter. Not the vehicle's fault. Was it the best use of resources? You'd have to have a crystal ball in 1940 to say that.
Now, when we get to the end of the life of the M18, I'm going to come up with a very salient point that I'd like to bring up. So, as I said at the beginning,
I've got one more thing I want to say, and then maybe we'll go to that because we have been banging on for an hour now.
Really? Feels like only 2 minutes.
Moments ago. In the slideshow behind us, there is a Chinese M18, and it is lost to us, and it's one of those things because it fought for a side that's largely been lost to history in terms of the Kuomintang nationalist Chinese in China.
Republican China.
Yeah. So a large number, a couple of hundred.
214.
There you go, a couple of hundred. Bang on. Were shipped to China and were used to fight the Japanese and then used to fight the communists later. The M18 that's in the slideshow behind us is currently, as far as I can tell, as of like 5 years ago, sitting in Shandong, which is way up in northern China, in a park and looking in quite good nick, all things considered. And I would love to know more about the history of how they were used, because I mean, an M18 against any Japanese tank in...
huge overkill.
Yeah.
I think it's the
Scary as.
But even, I mean, your mobility, it's not like they had a lot of highly developed roads you could be running around on.
No, but 20-ton bridges weren't that uncommon.
True.
A heavier tank wouldn't have been useful to them. So,
No.
it was quite a clever send, and the fact that this thing has survived into the modern era. I did a Creative Commons search for M18 because obviously we're not paying for our images for a free podcast, and it's just a little gem of this Chinese one still sitting in a as a memorial in China. I'm just really really happy about. And I wish we knew more, but basically, Republican China lost the war and fled to Taiwan and still kind of lives on there in ways that we discussed at length last episode.
And there are plenty of M18s in Taiwan. Some on display, some sitting in bunkers in various places, and there are.
And against a Chinese amphib, that 76 gun would still probably do some things, but
But we'll get on to the export market, as it were.
Okay, all right.
So. We're going to... one last thing. For the talk from Lieutenant General in the end in William Desibray, as I said, Team Desibray was the force that was sent north of Bastogne to hold
the key crossroads.
Key crossroads of Neuville, and basically protecting the northern flank of Bastogne at that time. He was also part of the implementation of the M1 Abrams later on in his career in the American military. And
that turned out quite well.
And he said, one of the things he said in his talk, now whether or not he's being factual in his reminiscences of his talk that he's giving in...
These things do tend to acquire a golden glow.
Yep. Was that when he saw the Panthers and the Panzer IVs of the German tanks slowly trundling through the mud down the slope to Neuville, he said he realised that's what he did not want for any sort of American tanks for the future, and that influenced his decisions for the M1 to have certain characteristics of being able to manoeuvre quickly through any terrain. So not being able to only... Because the Panthers and the Panzer IVs were coming down, and he said about 4 or 5 miles an hour as they traversed the slope down into the town, and made them easily pickings for the 4 tank destroyers that he had with him in the town, and be able to shoot them, basically take them out as required, and he could manoeuvre his Hellcats within the town, saying, all right, there's an armoured thrust coming from here, so take those ones out and then get around to the other side of the town and see what's over there and make sure you're taking out whatever's over there. So again, it was and being able to say, okay, for the M1, which can only just do similar speeds to the Hellcat, he said, I want something that can traverse terrain at speed and be able to get there when I need it to. Hello, Papa.
Sorry, Rob's got a dog wanting to talk to him.
We're going to show a dog.
Oh, there she is. Yes.
She's demanding attention.
That's Ian, oddly enough named after Ian M. Banks, who we were just talking about his books earlier. All right, but she probably needs to go out the hallway. Yes. There we go.
Go on.
Okay.
All right. Should we take a bit of a break there, John?
Let's finish up on the Hellcat, I reckon. And,
there's plenty more to go.
Well, let's wrap it up, mate.
There's so much to talk about.
We've got a lot to talk about in the second half of the podcast, don't worry, folks, and we've got a long chat with the Chieftain. So let's keep trucking on the M18 for now.
All right. So lots of hulls. So of the 2,500 hulls built, lots of them were converted into the M41 Prime Mover and or the M30
T41.
M41.
T41 Prime Mover. Anyway, sorry. Yep.
And the M39 utility vehicle, which also went to Korea. So the actual M18 Hellcat had no American Army usage outside of World War II. But it did have some as the M39 utility vehicle went to Korea. They also gave a number of those to West Germany in West German Army, Bundeswehr or whatever, in the 50s. As we said, 214 were given to the Republic of China, which then went to Taiwan to fight the Japanese and the...
Some of them escaped to Taiwan.
Yep.
Some of them ended up in the park in Shandong province.
Yep. So with those, a number of the hulls wore out, and the turrets were taken off the Hellcats and then placed upon the M42 chassis to form the basis of the Type 64 light tank.
There you go.
There was a couple given to the Soviets and to the British for evaluation as for Lend-Lease vehicles. As I said, they said, nah, we don't need these. The Greek army got 127, which were retired by 1960.
I mean, if you want to get in a real dirtball of a historical Greece post World War II was a mess.
I know, and because they didn't really go into how these things were used, and I bet they really was limited to the World War II and the American aspect of it.
Communists, anti-communist partisans, very vicious
there would
fighting.
Have been and I was thinking about that, and I said, "Oh, look, we've got a lot to cover, and I don't think we're going to get into that." But it would be very interesting to see how they were used in Greece after the Second World War, because that was probably a very exciting times. They retired, and they kept some vehicles for training. Same with Yugoslavia. So the Yugoslavia was given 260. They had been refurbished in northern Italy by a northern Italy company, and then given to Yugoslavia, who had them and were using them up until basically the breakup of Yugoslavia, and where they were kept in reserve. And then once the breakup happened in the 90s, they were then pulled out of reserve and used in various parts of the civil wars between Serbia and Croatia and every other little country that decided to raise their hand at the time.
The Balkan conflict, I think, is the broad overarching.
Yeah. So and look, they saw action. They saw action in the 90s. They were out there doing stuff and getting shot at and shooting things and carrying out who knows what. We don't want to talk about that. I don't think about that too much. Iran got 55 in the 1950s. No idea whether or not they're still going. Wouldn't surprise me if they are, because it's a simple...
I don't know how many would have survived the meat grinder of the Iran-Iraq war, but...
good point.
Yeah, and your capacity to get quickly to the fight has a problem when you're getting quickly to...
the wrong fight.
Relatively modern Soviet armour.
True. So who knows whether or not they're still going? It's quite possible they are, and they're kept in somebody's. They're kept by some sort of force there. Venezuela bought 40 in the 1950s, and then again, who knows what was going on down there as a CIA-controlled banana republic, essentially. Once they found oil. And then they refurbished theirs in the early 80s in 84. And then they were looking to refurbish them again in the 90s via one of the Yugoslav company, but so they only got a couple of those rebuilt, refurbished. So don't think any of those are still going. There's still some in, again, as monuments in various parks in Caracas and other places. They were deployed to the Pacific.
The Marines used them in the Philippines.
Not the Marines.
US Army, sorry.
US Army, yeah. No, the Marines didn't get any. So they were deployed to Okinawa in the Philippines, and they did take part in the Battle of Manila. And I can't remember the name of the which number of the 623 I want to say for Tank Destroyer Battalion. I got a unit citation for their actions in the Battle of Manila.
But a significant overmatch on Japanese armour.
Yeah, but basically they were just providing. Personally, I think they had. To a guess, I would say that they had some tonnage available to ship over there, and say, right, we could take 4 Shermans or eight of these, 8 tank destroyers. So let's take eight tank destroyers.
To fight Japanese armour, that's a sensible decision. Yeah.
Now, I'm sure I'll come up with. We've mentioned that the roof kit was developed but not actually fitted. The 90mm gun.
90mm gun, yeah.
The 90mm gun. Okay, again, they did decide to.
Because looking at YouTube, it's everything's about the 90mm gun. It's like it was never used.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, and that's a good point. Is that because they're looking at it from the point of view from games.
Yeah.
Where,
it's the end of the upgrade path.
Yeah, it is the end of the upgrade path. And when you've got a 90mm gun, and it'll kill anything on the battlefield for its tier or anything else. And so, as I said, the game version has been nerfed in a lot of aspects compared to its real life version, whereas a lot of tanks are upgraded from their real life version in order to make them playable in the games. But they looked at it. They said, "Yeah, we could do it, but we're not going to, because to do that, they've already been deployed. We'd have to then bring them out of theatre and back to back to America in order to fit these things and then ship them back. So there's absolutely no point carrying out this activity when we've already built it and done it. Plus, the 76 did the job. Now, my one last thought.
Oh, okay.
On the Hellcat, as I was saying before. So, the doctrine. Sorry, as it was deployed, I felt it was a tank that was half a war too late. But if the next war had kicked off straight away, it would have done very well against any T-34 armoured thrusts that were coming through anywhere. So think about that as even though they'd stopped stopped building them, they still had them available, and if things had kept on going, they would have been very effective for what they were and what they were doing against buttoned-down T-34 Soviet tanks that had no visibility and not as much armour as a Panther or a Tiger. So, yes, they didn't do. They were built half.
Yeah, columns of T-34s would have been massacred by these things.
So half a war too late or half a war too early, but they did the job. They achieved what they were after, and.
But they still might have been not the best use of resources, and another 2,000. Well,
come on!
Were the Americans ever short of 2,000 Shermans?
90k an hour tank. That's always a goal, isn't it?
Yeah.
The idea of it. All right, and are we going? Where are we going now from? John?
Okay, we're going to up at AusArmourFest 2022. Rob and I had a chat with Nicholas Moran, the Chieftain. In our defence, because this isn't a perfect piece of recording, we didn't know what the format was that this chat was going to be in, and it was torrential rain forecast for that day, so we had left a lot of our more sensitive equipment behind, and the upshot was...
I didn't do a very good job of interviewing.
Yeah, it's yeah.
And not only that, as I kept saying, it was the Australian artillery...
No, you got it right in this one.
Once I got it right. Once I got it right. I kept saying the Artillery and Army Museum, when of course it's the Armour and Artillery Museum, because Armour is the senior corps of the two.
Yes.
Of course, Stark forgets. I've forgotten that after 30 years.
All right. I'm not... Anyway, the point is, we know that there were things that could have been better in this little interview, but it is still a very interesting chat.
And next time, we'll do better.
I can't guarantee that, but you will try to do better. Yes, anyway, enjoy this, and we will be back with lots more chats. Here we go.
Good morning, folks. I'm Rob from Totally Tanked, and I'm here with the Chieftain, Nicholas Moran. He's come to the Cairns Artillery and Armour Museum, and wow, it's so great to meet you here and be able to spend some time hanging around tanks with you.
Well, it makes a nice change to put a face to the voices that I've been hearing between the two of you. But it's been a while since I've been here, and the man has just been expanding non-stop.
I cannot believe the extent that this museum has built up over the years, and I'm so disappointed that I didn't find it sooner. And it's been magnificent.
Is this your first trip here?
This is my first trip. I
How
could
do
have
you
come
manage
three.
Okay, granted, you had that COVID thing that
It
shut you down.
It is 2,500 kilometres from home, so it is a fair way as well. But, now, Nicholas, your favourite piece of kit on the trip here?
Oh, Jesus. Which of my children do I love most?
Yeah, well, I've heard you're talking about the L60 a bit.
The L60?
T60, maybe.
Oh, T60. Well, the T60 is an okay little light tank. The T72, I think it's criminally underrated. But what I like about collections like this is that you're able to look at them and see all the idiosyncrasies and quirks of each individual vehicle that you're just not going to get by looking at a wiki article or something like that. You got a wiki, it'll say, okay, it has this engine, this armor, this gun, and it might give you a bit of the development history, but you actually go and look at a tank and you realize, oh look, they put a mud scraper right here, or they use screws instead of rivets at this particular location. I wonder why they did that. And it makes you think about all the support structures and everything else that makes the tank useful.
And who found the thing that went wrong to say, yep, we've got to change this?
Yeah.
Did all the paperwork and said we need...
especially because they got such a variety. They got some of the earliest Mark IVs out there here, and they have some of the later Mark IVs, or Panzer IVs. You can just see the development of the two tanks.
They're all pretty good. Look, I've got to say, we went for the ride in the T72 yesterday, and it was incredibly fun. It was a very big adrenaline rush for us for riding around in an iconic tank like that. I've had a good time here.
Yeah, I'll be doing a full filming on that one now next week. So after the day's done, they pack the tanks. They're going to take a day. My cameraman went to go fishing, and then we're going to be back for 3 days doing some more in detail stuff, and there's less chaos going around.
And look forward
T72 is one of the ones because it's intact inside. I mean,
Yeah.
it's completely intact outside inside, so it should be good video.
Yeah, no,
And people, oh, T72 is a terrible tank. Well, it is by 2020 standards. I mean, you wouldn't use a Sherman in Desert Storm. You'd be asking for trouble.
yeah, it's like the T55s. Yes, yes. No, we've had a great time here at the Cairns Artillery and Armour Museum, and I hope you have too. John, was there any questions you want to go through? All righty.
Really, I've come all this way. You got no questions.
Well,
you say 2,500 kilometers. I've come like 17,000 kilometers.
I've had some experience wandering around armoured vehicles, not as much as you, but and I'm looking forward to hopefully getting the Leopard out today so they can run around in the mud.
Oh, they got the 185 is running around, the Belgian one. Yeah.
Oh, it is. They haven't got it going yet. They were still whacking away with the spanners in the rear deck a few minutes ago. So
Well,
we'll see.
the Leopard's a good piece of kit.
It is,
They'll
it
have
is.
it running. And plus, that's one of the ones that I have the most experience with. So, I mean, the manager, he was a Leopard guy. The head mechanic was a Leopard Remy, I think you pronounce it
yes,
here.
that's where we are.
As opposed to Remy. Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm sure they'll figure it out. And if nothing else, you can just grab a piece out of one Leopard and stick it into the other Leopard and make it go.
I'm always checking out the tank phones on the back of the Leopard. Say, yep, the Australian one's got it there, and I couldn't see one on the Belgian one. So
Yeah. It's interesting. The Belgian ones that come up everywhere. There's like this massive bulk sale of 50 of them at one time. And it's like Ontario Regiment, oh, we'll take 4 of those, and Battlefield Vegas will take 2 or 3 of those, and obviously one's made its way out here,
yeah.
and
Rob's
showing up
good.
everywhere. But they're fun to drive, they're reliable as heck, and that's why they're so popular for musea these days. And of course the Gepard, the guy was actually Jason was driving the Gepard around yesterday, just flinging it around.
And I was worried for the Schwimmwagen that was going around in front of it, saying they're catching him, and it's gonna. If you don't have the visibility down however many meters in front, that Schwimmwagen was just going to disappear under the tracks because the Leopard, the Gepard, was going around at a good rate of knots.
Clip, yeah.
He was clipping around. But today they were probably going a little bit slower because we've had a bit of rain overnight, and there's the mud's out in the track, and I think the ARV is going to.
Oh, that's not going to slow them down.
I think the Stug 4's already.
Well, that's nothing to do with the mud, I don't think. So the
no.
Stug 4 and the Spartan have both gone down already, and it's only 10 o'clock. But that's what you get when you run museum pieces. There's 2 schools of thought when you have museum pieces. Do you run them and risk them breaking, or do you just leave them on static display? And for better or worse, the policy here is you run them.
And I think it's a great policy. They're having so many running tanks available.
Yeah, it's not like it's the last remaining Hurricane fighter that, oh dear, it just stalled and crashed and burned up and killed the pilot. And we no longer have a Hurricane anymore or a Hurricane pilot. But a tank, if it breaks down, okay, the worst that happens is it might catch a small fire.
And we have seen the fire marshal stationed around the track ready to go, and just in case those sort of things happen. But it's not happening today, so that's good.
What do I have on my channel?
Yeah, come forward.
I've got an autonomous vehicle or remote control vehicle that US Army is playing around with. It's in a counter drone configuration. So I mean, people say, "Oh, the death of the tank. The drone is the death of the tank." So, guys have figured this out some time ago. They know to pay attention to drone warfare. And even if you're looking at Ukraine, the first couple of weeks of Ukraine, it was Bayraktar, Bayraktar, Bayraktar.
But you
haven't seen very many videos of it recently, have you? Because the Russians have figured out, oh yeah, air defense is the thing. We probably should pay attention
And
to it.
we were talking about it yesterday. The smarts you can get on your even on your phone these days to be able to find a moving thing in the sky and then try and send that information to some sort of targeting system wouldn't be that hard.
No, it's not, because the thing does transmit information.
Yeah.
It's got a heat signature. It's got an EM signature.
And it's a very fragile piece of kit flying around up in the sky there. Wouldn't take much to knock them down. So
No, it doesn't. So you proximity fuse 30, 35 millimeter rounds, and that'll be the end of it. Oh, well, how about a drone swarm? Have you seen the rate of fire of a Gepard?
Well, hearing that the Germans are bringing the Gepards out of storage just in case.
I don't blame them. Rheinmetall have a truck man at 35. There's even short little 35s that, it's like a Bushmaster, they're this long. Yeah, you're not going to punch through the side of an IFV with it, but you'll certainly do a number on a drone.
Yeah.
And you can mount that on top of a Humvee, or these days a JLTV.
And we're thinking whether or not they get a call up here to return the Gepard for some extra use or something like that. Saying it's running. Well.
Yeah, I can imagine them raiding the museums. They did that in '91. Okay, we need tracked rapier. All the tracked rapiers went into museums. Gate guards, let's grab them back. Give them a quick once over before sending them to
various conflicts that's happened in the last 5 years is saying, yep, there's a vehicle, T-55 in this location. We're just going to, as a museum piece, we're going to go in, put some petrol in it or diesel in it, crank it over, and they've driven it out.
If you got, people are saying, oh yeah, the T-62s are being dragged out of storage. Well, okay, I get you. It's not the problem of it's a T-62. It's the problem that they're using their tanks badly enough that they've run out and they've gone down to the T-62s. If you can kill a T-62, you can probably kill a T-72, just with the systems that are out there.
Yeah.
So it's not like they're more vulnerable.
No,
it's just they're just not going to be any better or any more successful.
No, but it's, if you don't have a tank on the battlefield or something you can take out a tank, then a tank is very useful to have.
Yeah.
And even if
you got something that can take out a T-62, it'll probably take out a T-72, at least with the current top attack warheads and all that sort of thing.
And it's a question of how many artillery rounds are still going around these days for the amount that they've fired. And if you bring out those T-62s, they can at least work as indirect fire with whatever ammunition they've got in storage.
They can do that and find people who know how to use them. The tank is far from gone.
No, exactly.
What else have I got coming out? I'm kind of done with the doctrine videos for a little while. I might have a relook at them for mid-war changes, but there's not going to be much. It's kind of weird. It's a lot easier to find the information on the pre-war than the mid-war. It's kind of odd. I've got a few more videos coming out of Fort Lee, and one or two, including one of the American Christie tanks. U.S. Army didn't like Christie, so they didn't buy. They bought more Christie tanks from 30 to like 37 than they bought anything else. They gave them a fair shake. They just didn't work, or at least not well enough for the Army, U.S. Army. The Russians, of course, the Soviets had their own opinions on the matter and got lots and lots of BTs. I've got a couple of interviews lined up with I don't know when this is going to go out, so I'm not going to spoil it just in case there's a last minute change.
That's fine.
There are stars on their shoulders, I'll tell you that. I don't know if I have anything else particularly. I'm looking at going back to Austria, doing an SK-105 if at all possible, the Cuirassier. That's about it. I've got enough to keep me going for a little bit. I have to go back also to my autoloaders, US autoloaders Part 2, which I did Part 1 many, many moons ago. And it's just one thing or another has kept coming up and bumping it further down the queue. So anyway, I haven't run out of stuff to talk about yet.
And that's what people keep asking us, when are you going to get to such and such? We say, well, we're doing one tank a month and we're going to keep on doing that. And I think we've got a good journey in front of us just by going through them, doing our own little bit of research and then having a bit of a chat and really enjoying spending that time delving in, because as with any sort of study, it's a case of there are layers and depths to whatever you go into, whether it's, as you're saying, is why did they do such and such on a tank, whether it's screws or bolts, or where's the mud scraper there, or even is there a handhold here, or why, because they're carrying troops on the back or whatever else. There are always depths to whatever you're looking into, and be able to talk about and say, yep, this made it a better tank because they could sit people on the back of it and bring the mounted infantry or dismounted infantry into combat with them. Just simple things like that, and all these things are a consideration as you're going through the development of the tanks and what their roles in history were.
Yeah, the background to it is usually more important than the tank itself. How did you end up with what you have is as important as what did you end up with. But I guess I probably should mention what I am getting out of here is, so this is, I tend to split between wargaming funded trips and personal Patreon, YouTube funded trips. This is a wargaming funded trip, so anything that is recorded here is going to come out of the World of Tanks channel. And so we're focusing on you'll see the FSV, you'll see the T-72, you'll see quick 5-minute videos or less on a bunch of other vehicles, particularly the rare Aussie stuff that he has here. And that's enough to keep coming out for the next few months.
The Australian Cruiser is going to be I'm sure we'll do a little bit more on that ourselves while we're here.
Watch out for an interview. So the guy who wrote the book, the latest
Yes.
book on display there, he runs the place here. So
Yep.
we're going to put him in front of a camera and just have him chat about all the stuff that he's learned. Because the last video I did on Sentinel was 6-7 years ago. And frankly, the amount of information that was out there wasn't a hell of a lot.
No,
So from a quick glance through his book, it looks like he's done a lot more detailed work and probably has new information.
Of the 6 Sentinels left, we've got 2 here in the museum, so it's pretty...
And if you, I don't know if you caught it, but if you look at the serial numbers, the turret of the 2-pounder one, it's actually got a third. It's actually from the hull of the AC4 mock-up. The serial numbers actually match.
And yet, they've got the
And then the one went all the way
pounder,
to California, came all the way back, and now they're sort of sitting right next to each other.
and they've got the 17-pounder on the other one, so on the AC4.
How on earth did they get 17 pounder into that turret?
Well, that's the question. So obviously they had to muck around with the recoil mechanism, which ended up being used later. The Aussies are very happy about this, they're very proud of this. They used it in the Firefly configuration. But the problem that I have is the size of the hull. I say, oh yeah, well it'll be a 70-inch turret ring on the AC4. Well, okay, that's fair. You can do that because Firefly's only 69. But if you look at the vehicles that were specifically designed to take a 17-pounder from the outset, Centurion, Black Prince, those are much, much wider tanks than Sentinel. No matter how much of an overhang you're going to have on the turret ring to get the 70-inch turret ring, the hull is still only this wide. So there is going to be a serious space issue for both operation of the gun and simply carrying ammunition. I mean, you had to kick one guy out to make room for the ammo on the Sherman, which is a much bigger tank. So I remain to be convinced that the AC4 would have been a good tank. And especially considering where it was going to go, like against Japan.
I was about to say, against the Hago, it'd do all right for that.
Yeah, you aim for 3 Hagos in a row and you just punch through them all at once.
Do you think you'll get a chance to climb in the AC4?
Well, the mock-up, I don't see any point because it is just a mock-up anyway.
Oh, okay.
So, I mean, I don't even know if there's a breach for that 17-pounder at that time. I'll have a look, but it's not going to be much. Anyway, time to get back to work, I think.
All right, thank you, Nicholas. It's been a real pleasure talking to you, and I hope you enjoy Cairns and the Australian Armour and Artillery Museum.
Oh yeah, well, I'm sure I'll see you in a year or two.
Yeah, I hope so.
Take care.
And we're back.
We're back. Wow. What as I said, next time I'll do better. But it was lovely meeting. And look, I got to say, the Chieftain, Nicholas Moran, he's a lovely man, and he had so much time for us. From the time we picked him out of the crowd in Sydney Airport as we were about to fly up to Cairns, he was a complete and utter gentleman, and we really enjoyed being able to spend a weekend with him. Even asking him out to dinner on the Sunday night and having a great chat with him. And after Friday night, we'd had the World of Tanks things, and we'd had a number of us going along to that.
I was going to say it was a particularly proud moment at the moment when the World of Tanks folks turned up with the Chieftain to McGinty's pub in Cairns. We actually had more totally tanked fans in the pub.
Lovely viewers and listeners.
Than there were World of Tanks and Chieftain people, which the World of Tanks people were very impressed by. Thanks so much to our folks. It was mind blowing to us because we do a podcast and it goes into the ether to actually have real human beings.
And I'd like to give a few shout outs while we're here. So first off to Nick from South Australia, who, as was sitting there, is turned around, sitting there at Australian AusArmourFest, has turned around and said, "Are you guys from Totally Tanked? I recognise your voices." Nick, thank you very much for that. That
made our lives.
That made our, it really did. So as he's driving, he listens to us as he's driving around the vineyards in South Australia. To Jake from World of Tanks, and Brad and Clayton and Paul. Clayton and Paul, you guys were so much fun. I'm so glad we got a chance to meet you guys and spend some time with you. I'm trying much better to actually engage with the camera.
That was some feedback Rob had.
That was some great feedback. Yeah. Harrison and his dad Steve. Look, guys, I hope things are going fine for you guys. Still going okay. Really appreciated the time you spent with us. It was really great being able to have a chat with you and spend that time. That was really nice. And then Herman, Joseph, and Jean. Again, great to catch up with you folks at various pubs as we went through. So, look, it was we really enjoyed being able to come up to Cairns, catch up with folks who'd been listening to us, and spend some time talking and hanging out. And it made it rather than just we get to see tanks during the day and having nothing to do with the night. It was a case of, we got to see tanks during the day, ride around in them, and then go hang out and talk to other people about what you really enjoyed and what you'd really done.
Yeah, look, I mean, I would say one thing I loved about being at a tank festival was just the utter lack of pretense. It was just people from lots of different walks of life.
Yes.
And at one moment we got stuck in a queue for 40 minutes in front of some 20-year-olds, and it was just like seeing ourselves. Just younger and dumber.
But they had a girl with them, so...
we would have had Sam Hobson with us back in the day.
But they had a lovely time, and they rode so many tanks and had a great time.
Well,
really,
except for their one friend who turned up with no money. But he got to watch his friends having a great time. But yeah, it was tremendously fun, and it just us being in a social setting where no one's got any airs and graces or pretenses except a common shared interest. So my point is that if you are listening to this podcast, there's a very good chance you like tanks. Almost 100% guaranteed. And I would say a tank festival might actually be something that will make your life worthwhile. My understanding is that you've got Tank Fest at Bovington in the UK for Europe. You've got the Aquino Days at the Ontario Regiment in Canada, is the big one for North America. And then in Australia, AusArmourFest in Cairns is our big one for running tanks. And I have always thoroughly enjoyed the very rare occasions when I've gone to tank museums and they've had running tanks as part of the day. But to be at a festival where there would have been at least, 70 different vehicles went around? Something like that. Over the course of the 3 days.
I'll say yes, just because on the Friday in the World War II vehicles going around, even though you couldn't ride in them, there were a huge number of vehicles going around, whereas the other 2 days, the vehicles that you could ride in were more limited, but you could ride in them.
Yeah, but you could literally ride in them. And
I've got the bruises to prove it.
Have
you got bruises?
I had a lot of bruises around my sternum where the tank hatch kept banging into it. I don't know what actual tank drive... They must have some special padding there.
I don't think they actually stand up out of the hatch while they're driving.
TCs do a lot when they're not in combat. But anyway, yes. So our point is, A, go to tank festivals. B, if it's a tank festival we are particularly good at sniffing out where the after party's at, and we got our listeners to the good after parties.
Yes.
So mission accomplished there, and come hang out with us at the next tank festival we're going to.
Look, I won't stop with my shout outs. I'll also say a great big thanks to Lottie and Pete from the Tank Museum. They were so gracious and they did so much work. Huge amount of work all over the weekend.
It actually terrifies me how fatigued people were getting while operating tanks in the festival.
And directing them and everything else.
Yeah.
And yet they still managed to make time for us and even come out on the Friday night and catch up with us. And so thank you very much to Lottie and Pete. We'll have an interview with Lottie for the next episode.
Yeah, Lottie the Tank Whisperer. She's at the moment only got one YouTube video up, but she has plans for more. And as a relatively young woman with an incredible knowledge and understanding of armoured vehicles,
drives them,
maintains them,
directs them, fixes them, breaks them.
Yeah.
She was a really good, fun person to
She's
hang
really
out
one to watch, and she we had paid for a ride in a Sabre, so she didn't do us a favour there. But when there was a big queue to unload the tanks, she took us around for an extra lap at an unbelievable speed, and it was... Suddenly I was like, I understand all these stupid British light tanks of the Cold War that start with S, because they're so much fun.
I'm pretty sure that's where I got most of my...
a few of those bruises, yeah.
because we were bouncing around. Because she was throwing us. I was pretty sure she was going to get some air for us going over one of the bumps. And look, it was a great fun ride. It did really make me appreciate the difference in riding in the short wheelbase track vehicles.
Oh yeah.
Which would bounce around everywhere and be very violent in their movements versus the long track base T72 and Leopards.
The Leopard in particular, the ride was, and this is one of the reasons why, if you're interested in tanks, getting a chance to actually ride in them is a really big deal. The Leopard one that we went around the track in, it would dip into holes, but then it just flatten out gracefully at the bottom of them in a way that no other vehicle that we rode. And I think I rode 6 vehicles over the weekend, and you were probably 5 or yeah. And the one other thing I would note is that at the tier 1 level, where you're paying $100 a ride, you have to queue for hours to get the tank that everyone wants, and everyone always wants the same tank. Still worth it. If you go up to the gold tier, literally you wander down and a young man says, oh, and sir, what tank would you like us to start? We will summon the driver. And for me, that was Panzer IV. Now, in the video we're going to play at the end, I think I call it an Aus for J, but I'm pretty sure it was a G. I got confused. Yeah, if you're traveling,
you're a JG, so it could be a GJ. I mean, it's all a bit of a...
Yeah, my point is, if you're traveling, the expense of traveling and the time it takes to travel, budget to spend some money on having the rides would be my advice if you're going to a tank festival, because what's the point in taking 5 days out of your life and paying for 3 nights accommodation and airfares if you don't spend a bit of money to actually get inside the vehicles.
It was good fun, and we really enjoyed ourselves.
Yeah, I'm just feeling like my life's wasted not riding tanks at this point. Yeah.
All right,
which is a good feeling to have from a festival. You know, you've been at a good festival when you feel that way.
All right, other people I'd like to give a shout out to is Alan, who met on the commander's deck, who was stationed in northern Germany in the Centurions in the 50s. Having a good chat with him about doing stuff in the Cold War. And
we did ask him to record. He just didn't want to talk about his military service.
No. But he did tell us about running for the shelter in England when the V1s were coming across, when the rocket attacks were coming across. So he was around for that. I would also like to shout out for the museum itself for having individual soundtracks for the World War II tanks on the Friday. So each tank would have its own soundtrack that they'll play as it was going around the track. So I thought that was a very good little touch. And the old fellow who was going for a ride in the tanks, we were very worried about him getting into the turret in the rain. He was well into his 80s, we thought.
Possibly older.
Yeah. But he seemed very competent as he was climbing in and out of the hatches of the turret.
Now, I was informed by onlookers that he had previously owned a tank museum.
Yes, so that's the reason why.
Yeah, he really knew what he was doing. But
he knew what he was doing.
Everyone, the fact he was wearing overalls was probably an indicator if you know what to look for at these things. But yeah.
All right, and lastly, I'll give one more shout out too. Now, we weren't sure we were going to comment on this one, but the Chieftain, when we went out to dinner with him on the Sunday night, did mention how
he was a sad and sorry Chieftain.
He'd had a bit of an interesting day because on the Saturday afternoon, he'd been given the chance to ride in the T72.
To drive the T72.
Drive the T72 around the track prior to putting it away. And as he's coming around a corner, he said he made a bit of a mistake and ran over the trailing arms of the 88mm gun that was stationed in the middle of the...
So to set the scene, you've got a figure 8 track which the vehicles are all going around, and for the Grand Parade at the end they cut the arms out of the figure 8 and just make it an oval. And in the middle of all this, there is an ancient and extremely battered 88.
Very rusty.
As the Chieftain said to us, maybe I damaged it, but who can tell? It wasn't in great condition. And it's important to note that I think the maximum height of a Russian tank driver is 5'7", and the Chieftain, I would guess, is around 4 or 5.
Yeah, he's not small.
And so as he veered off the track, he was unable to apply the brake because his leg was too long and couldn't get any pressure on it. And he then discovered what he had not known, and he explained to us that when you depress the clutch on a T-72, you lose all steering. And he has driven more types of tanks than most people, but this was news to him. And in that moment, as he ended up running over the 88,
And-
in a moment of ancestral revenge for tanks everywhere over anti-tank weaponry.
Yeah, so, as I said, there is, and while the staff had been asked to not say anything about it, somebody had managed to capture it.
Well, the fact that at every moment of this festival there are at least 30 cameras surveying the scene.
And he has since posted on that, so we feel that we can actually talk about it now because...
We were otherwise sworn to secrecy.
well,
but
we weren't sworn to secrecy,
No,
but
it's just a nice thing to do.
We were implying that because he was so lovely and so nice and had so much time for us. I didn't want to do something, and I'm not going to spoil some of the other things that he was doing during that trip that we will mention probably next time when they're out in the wild world.
Yes. Anyway,
But,
more to come.
Yes, more to come. But for the moment, what we will say is that there is a fun video of that, and look, it was all okay. Everybody was happy and safe at the end of it. It was just some feelings got a little bit hurt, and then it was an interesting day for him on the Sunday, and which is when we did the interview. But it was fine. It was everybody was okay.
Yeah.
So it's the important part. And John, we have quite a bit of beer to drink here.
Yeah, well, let's talk a little bit more about the Tank Festival experience, because I think this is really important information. I'm guessing that most of our audience have never been to a tank festival, but you're all extremely interested in tanks. So I guess our point is, one, you don't want to just sit in a hotel room watching television after the festival. So
even though we did watch the Tank Biathlon, which we'll get to
next episode. But if it's the Cairns Festival, we're not guaranteeing we're going to be there next year. But
we might hopefully be at the Rugby World Cup and maybe seeing the French Tank Museum.
Well, there's that. But anyway, our point is that if we're at the Tank Festival, follow us on Facebook, and we'll hook you up with the pubs to go to hang out with the cool kids. Because we're not saying we're the cool kids. We're saying we're pretty good at sussing out where the party's at. And we did on the Friday. We worded up an enormous number of people about where they wanted to be.
We managed to live up to our expectations of when we saw somebody wearing one of our T-shirts.
Yes.
We managed to buy them a beer. Thank you
Yes.
very much, Clayton. You were lovely, and we really appreciated you and Paul hanging out with us.
Yes.
But yes, there are T-shirts available, I'm sure.
At redbubble.com, search for Totally Tanked. Also, this is an important moment.
Pins?
Patreon.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Go on.
So people have been hassling us, I don't want to buy a T-shirt, the shipping cost to India is $40, and I don't mean to mock you, I just kind of, that's my nature. So there is a Patreon for Totally Tanked, and there's a base level supporters tier where you're just helping us pay for the cost of hosting, which, is, $30 a month, and beer for the podcast, which is not insignificant. Rob pays for the beer.
I like beer.
Yeah, but also we are planning, if we get anyone signing up for the slightly higher tier Patreon, we will do a quarterly online event, probably on Zoom, where we all get to have a chat, and you can tell us what you want to see in the podcast.
I was about to say, it might be your chance to influence what tanks will do next.
Yeah, or just talk about all this stuff that we talk about. So there will be a special event for sponsors. Patreon.com, search for Totally Tanked. To get the t-shirts, redbubble.com, Totally Tanked. So there is that. But we would just say tank festivals, if you love tanks, and if you've listened to this much of this podcast, obviously you do, go to them. There is loving tanks, there is reading the Wikipedia articles, there is building the models, and then there is seeing the actual things moving. I had seen Panthers in museums probably half a dozen times in my life. To see one actually moving totally changed my understanding of the vehicle.
And look, when you think of Panthers, you say, okay, the Tiger was the big one, and it was the medium one. It's as big
It's
as
huge!
It's as big as a Tiger. All right?
And I've stood next to it in a museum without understanding how huge it was.
But having both the Tiger and the Panther available to stand beside and look at, you realise, okay, yeah, it's the same size as a Tiger. It just happens to be slightly differently configured type thing, whereas all the others were much smaller.
But also, you watch these things go around, and particularly the Australian Museum of Armour and Artillery has a slightly worrying number of Panzer IVs. They've got a lot of them. And they're running around just fine. They're starting them up. They're running them around the track with people hanging out. There's me with my ass hanging out of one. I was meant to change. Let me just change the... Whoops, sorry guys. Patience. There we go. Sorry. Pictures of us running around the track. Should have done this earlier. Sorry. Yeah, so, you have your ass hanging out of a Panzer IV, it goes around the track, and you got to understand, and at a tank festival, the program is indicative only because they just don't know what's actually going to start in the morning.
The T-55 didn't start on the Sunday, so we got the T-72 again.
Yeah, the T-72 just kept going round and around. They kept putting oil in, but sorry, to let me finish, the vehicles may or may not start, but the Panzer IVs were pretty reliable. The Panther, they nursed that round one lap. It was not, and it's the same. It's pretty much the same engine, the Maybach engine. It's just the fact it weighs so much more, and the gears, the transmission was not beefed up, and you really get a sense that, like we talk about it all the time in these podcasts, but you actually see them nursing it around the track while the Panzer IVs keep whipping around, and you start to understand these things at a deeper level.
Yeah. Look, sorry, one other thing I was going to say is a plug for the Chieftain's book, Can Openers, which is all about, guess what? Tank destroyers, American tank destroyers.
The M18's one of them.
M18 is definitely one of them, and all the various configurations of tank destroyers used by the US Army through that period of time, but because they moved away from the actual tank destroyer idea straight after the war. So it was he has a book out for it, available on hardcover and also on Kindle. So have a look and grab those if that's the sort of thing you're into. But right now, what are we going to do, John?
I think, Rob, it's time for beer review. And Rob, you had some criticism from Alan. Alan, I hope you're still watching.
I'm sorry.
That we did Budweiser last time. It was an American tank. And this time, look at this.
No. His recommendation was to get a Sam Adams.
Yeah,
I tried.
It wasn't available in Canberra right now.
I tried to blame COVID and the shipping industries.
Now, I would say for most of our audience on audio, you're not going to appreciate this, but the video watchers
Stars and Stripes
can see this magnificent.
And I'm assuming it's a 48 Stars and Stripes because it's not lined up. So it's a World War II. Stars and Stripes.
Could be. Well done, Rob.
I'm going to say that.
I'm glad you discarded the other flag-based can for this one. So it's Barrier Brewing Company from Oceanside, New York. And it is, Rob, you've bought a pint of 7.4% beer to the arse end of a boozy podcast. So it's
an IPA. You asked for an IPA.
It's going to get messy from here. It's a NEPA. It's a New England IPA, which means it's hazy and all sorts of things. But we're going to give it a go. We're going to find out what's.
It's not an Imperial pint.
It's a big can.
It's only a 450.
Look at the size of the thing.
It's only a 450. It's not an Imperial pint.
In South Australia, they have taken the 375 milliliter standard can design and just called it a pint because they're cheating buggers in South Australia.
Seriously?
Yeah.
You can't do that.
No, you can't do that. That's what I say. So we have the classic NEPA haze, not too thick, not too murky. So I'm liking it already. The head is nice and white. It's like the nose is lovely.
Barrier Brewing.
This is
brewed
some good.
And packaged by Barrier Brewing
This
Company.
is some good
Oceanside,
beer, Rob.
New York.
What did you pay for this?
I think it was $12 a can.
Wow. Jesus.
Deadly combination with Strata and Motueka. What are those? Are they?
Strata's a hop. I use it quite often. It's a lovely one. I've never used Motueka. That sounds like a New Zealand hop though.
It has some pumpkin skulls, I think they are, on the can.
Oh, that is lovely. Okay, so Barrier Brewing's 2-hop rotating IPA series. So it's a New England style India Pale Ale. Keep cold, drink fresh. And I'm not normally a huge NEPA fan, but they have made a really nice beer with this one. So you'll be hard pressed to find this exact one anywhere else, but Barrier Brewing New England IPAs will be something similar, I guess. And
That's a lot of flavour in that.
ooh,
Oh yeah. Oof.
really nice mouthfeel as well, which is something that they use a lot of oats in NEPAs and New England IPAs, and I can't promise you there's oats in this, but the mouthfeel feels like it's got oats.
I believe you.
Yeah.
But yeah, as I said,
Ooh. It doesn't taste like a 7.5% beer either.
No.
7.4. Wow. Okay. Probably not the beer I'd recommend for the end of a podcast where
I
you've drunk.
did try and bring it in earlier.
Yeah. We've had a lot on. Anyway.
There's a lot of things happening. All right,
I would... for a start, I mean, this magnificent flag-based bastard, if it's anywhere near the 4th of July, you got to have one of these in your hands, don't you? Barrier Brewing from Oceanside, New York. Seriously good stuff. Would recommend. Maybe not the 7.4% stuff later in your afternoon or evening. And with that, let's talk about Ukraine.
wait, before...
Oh, shit.
Sorry. There was so much to talk about this.
Yeah,
I know. All right, first off.
So we've literally cut the Tank Biathlon. Yeah, okay.
We've cut things in order to talk about one, Long Tan Day. All right, so prior to going up to AusArmourFest, it was Long Tan Day here in Australia, and which is the 18th of August, where 120 Australian diggers faced off against somewhere between 2,500 and 4,500 North Vietnamese army in the rubber plantation outside of Long Tan.
In the Vietnam War.
During the Vietnam War in 1966. Whilst the rest of the Australians are enjoying a concert by Little Paddy and various other bands. Which
Once you've flown Little Paddy out, yeah, people have to turn up.
and the NBA were turning up in the space.
Yeah.
So it's a big thing. It's a big thing for Australia, and
It was the biggest engagement of Australian forces in the Vietnam War.
well, not by us, but by the other side, because there was only 120 of us.
Yeah.
But the point being is that on the 18th of August, as I'm driving to work, there is the Long Tan Day Parade happening in front of the Vietnam War Memorial on the Anzac Parade. And they hadn't put out any sort of
Traffic management
around the parade, and so the troops were out in the middle of the road, and yet all the traffic had to merge across to the right-hand lane, and they were very respectful, but it really...
Sorry, for the non-Canberrans, Anzac Parade is the main ceremonial thoroughfare which links Parliament House to the Australian War Memorial. It is 3 lanes wide on either side, with an enormous marching space in between.
And lots of monuments.
And monuments lining all the side of it.
This weekend they're having a beer festival along there.
Along there?
Yeah.
Not in the Olives? Okay,
No,
right.
they're
Okay.
having the beer festival.
Well, I mean, the original plan by Walter Burley Griffin called for a casino where the War Memorial is. So, interestingly, if you look at the old diagrams, built to the same footprint as the actual War Memorial. But yeah.
Did you know you can take a laser pointer from Parliament House and shine it through across Canberra
Yes.
to the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier?
You can actually shine it if the doors are open through the front door of Parliament House, through the main hall, into the main committee room.
There you go, all the way across.
If the doors are open.
Yeah, there
which,
you go.
which
Anyway,
they're not.
I didn't manage to run over the Chief of the Army, who was, I'm assuming, was around the parade at that time.
You can only do that if you're driving a tank.
Which you are allowed to do in Canberra. There are provisions for driving tanks around Canberra. Now, there's some freedom in the city for that. But and then prior to us flying up to Cairns, where it was a balmy 22 to 28 degrees, it was -3 in Canberra. So we'll just to throw that out there. Just to,
It was really hard being in Cairns. No,
it was lovely. And
absolutely
the place
lovely.
we stayed was great, I've got to say.
Little Airbnb, perfectly positioned on Sheridan Street, which
Sheridan
both is a Tank and my partner. So I felt right at home.
So I just wanted to throw that in there. And then we're going to talk about
Ukraine.
Ukraine.
So we didn't want to talk about Ukraine this week because it just wasn't fitting in with our schedule. But things are happening. So Tasman, here you go. We're talking about Ukraine.
60k advance.
Yeah. Well, okay. Two things are going on. One, there was the highly telegraphed assault around Kherson, which you might call Kherson. Depending on.
We're Australian.
Ukrainian pronunciations are really hard. Which K's are silent, which ones aren't. Okay, so Kherson in the south. Oh, hang on, I've got a picture for this. Bear with me. Have I? Where's it got? There it is. Okay. Map of Ukraine. So Kherson's down in the south. It was the major conquest of the Russians in their assault. As in the biggest city that they actually captured, as opposed to all the failures. Huge Ukrainian assault there, very well telegraphed. YouTube channels like Laserpig have been talking for months about the assault of Kherson, and I suspect were worded up to put some word out on that one. And then, completely unexpected by anyone, a huge counter assault from coming out of Kharkiv. And I find it really interesting. We've been told by the Ukrainian armoured fists of 15 tanks. And when you consider the enormous armoured forces engaged on both sides at the start of the conflict, that 15 tanks is an armoured fist now just shows how exhausted both sides have been by the conflict, in my view. Anyway, the Russians in both positions have advanced over major rivers. You might remember a few months ago...
And water storage areas.
Yeah.
So not only just rivers, but basically
wide rivers. Yeah.
Large water storage areas. So they've been dammed and then became a great big lake behind them. So it's not an easy to cross thing.
But the point is, in both cases, the Russians have advanced across the rivers and are now in danger of being cut off with their forces across the rivers and unable to support them and resupply them. So the Ukrainians, and I strongly suspect with a lot of the finest minds the Pentagon has to offer, and also, frankly, the British are giving a lot of advice, in the middle of pulling off a very nifty strategic move whereby they have made a well-telegraphed assault in the south and then a surprise attack in the north, having drawn off the available reserves out of the northern front. You don't have to be the second coming of Hannibal
it's not even the north, it's actually the east, because the Russians are actually building forces in the north, in Belarus, which, in order to force them to redeploy those, is one of the reasons speculated as to why they've pulled off that assault in the east, is saying, well...
Sorry, when I said north and south, I was trying to just simplify the red zones on the map there.
But what I'm saying is that so one of the speculations, and look, have absolutely no intelligence on this sort of stuff whatsoever, is that by assaulting there in the east, it's going to force the Russians, who have built up 15,000 troops in the north in Belarus, which happen to be doing some sort of exercise, as it were, might have to then be deployed to shore up any defences that are around the various areas where the Ukrainians are attacking.
Anyway, as with most things the Ukrainians have done in this war, although I would note heavily supported by Western powers, and fighting a war with an unlimited supply of Western munitions is definitely how you want to fight a war.
Unlike the Russians, who are relying on North Korea to now provide them ammunition.
They're trying to loot North Korea, yeah. And I guarantee you, the North Koreans will not be sending the newest parts of the inventory. No. So they'll be using very old North Korean stock. Yeah, you almost feel sorry for the Russians, except for the economic damage this whole stupid conflict.
It's having on the entire world.
Yeah, and
From fuel to grain to
Yeah.
everything to gas to When we say gas, we mean fossil fuel gas.
yeah, most of our listeners can afford to buy dinner tonight, but the impacts of this war are meaning people in less fortunate parts of the world literally can't afford dinner tonight. And
come
and
come January, plenty of people in England will be saying we cannot afford to heat our homes, and hopefully it won't.
Well,
be
they've just announced a £120 billion energy assistance program. It's been completely lost because of the Queen dying. But
okay, so that actually came out yesterday or today.
Yeah.
Wow, there you go.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, they were afraid that British people were going to die of cold come this winter.
Yeah, though they still might, because there's a lot of other things to go on there. But yeah, it's horrific the impacts this conflict is having, and for not what benefit is anyone actually gaining from this is almost hard to tell. Except, I mean, the Ukrainians are fighting for their existence, and I can't deny them that. And what the hell Putin actually thinks he's doing, other than a slightly slighted pride that he wasn't invited to a NATO party. Yeah.
All right.
It makes me cross.
Yes. One. Do we have anything more on Ukraine?
I think that's all what I had to say. Except Ukraine is moving.
Yeah.
It's moving fast. Russian forces appear to be disintegrating in certain fronts. Whether they regather, the extent to which their defence in depth... Well, their doctrine of defence in depth is well documented, and they have retreated well beyond those lines, so that indicates a rout rather than a strategic withdrawal.
Okay.
But the extent of it, we will find out in future. I have seen videos of Russian troops fleeing the battlefield with 20 of them on a T-72 falling off, running into trees. I don't know if it's real, so I'm not going to show it to you because it looked a little computer gamey to me. But they are definitely having real trouble today, and frankly, until the point the Ukrainians rout them back over the borders of Ukraine, let them keep having trouble.
Yep, it's another month. We'll find out what's going on. One last thing I want to throw out there is that some of the folks we talked to in Cairns were all about the modelling aspects of the tanks, and so I'm quite happy to try and, having done some very poor modelling previously, not on the catwalk, but with little...
Look, both of us built model tanks as kids, but you know we're approaching 50 now, and we want to know from you, what are the good brand kits to buy, because we don't want to buy the wrong ones.
Now, so speaking of which, we have Tamiya, Airfix, Academy, Italiari, or Lego. Now, when I say Lego, I mean, people might say poo-poo all that, but...
Well, the Kube kits are quite good.
But the point being is, when I started looking at this, John, is that I looked at it and suddenly there was like 4 different kits for the M18 Hellcat in Lego, and I'm going, holy hell! It's a vibrant market of being able to do these things. So look, guys, please reach out to us and let us know what we can do with that, and I'm happy to take on a project. My child has plenty of Lego, and I might even be able to do some of that without buying the kits, but I'm actually more interested in buying the actual proper model kits and building those.
Let us know what brands we should be getting, and we will try and build a model for it's going to be complicated, but we'll figure it out. We'll give it a go.
And one last,
yes,
we also were given from the World of Tanks do on the Friday night at AusArmourFest this lovely depiction of a tank.
Which has got just enough green in it. It's almost invisible on the video feed, but it's getting there. It's fine.
It's got so many road wheels. It's got what looks to be an M1
it's an M1
turret.
Yeah. I would want to note that Wargaming, who are responsible for World of Tanks, World of Warships, invested a lot of money in supporting the Tank Festival in terms of flying the Chieftain around the world, but also camera crews, bringing their...
I haven't said thank you to Roy. I'll say thank you to Roy now. He was lovely too.
You did thank Jake and Roy, I think.
No, I don't think Thank
Anyway.
Roy, but anyway.
But my point is, Wargaming is spending real money supporting tank enthusiasts and adding quite a bit of magic and giving, little free model tanks to folks at tank festivals. And, War Thunder, if you're a War Thunder person, I'm not criticizing your choices, but I would say War Thunder either need to step up to also support the tank community, or, enthusiasts need to make some choices about where they spend their dollars. So that's all I would say on that, except, the Wargaming guys gave us a little floppy tank and also paid to fly the Chieftain to a festival here.
And gave us, we had a good chat with the guys.
Yeah, they're nice.
And really enjoyed it.
They were nice guys. I'm sure the War Thunder guys are nice too, but they weren't there.
Yeah.
And turning up is important. So, Jamie tells us TACOM is a good new brand. And Tasman, I see your comments. I appreciate them. Folks, thank you so much for listening. We've got more viewers now than we did at the start, so that's really encouraging. And sorry, Rob, I put a line across your head with that image. I don't quite know why it's doing that. But yeah. Okay. Thank you, folks, so much. We have gone over 2 hours, and
Wow.
we do appreciate you listening to us. Next episode, we will have our chat with Lottie the Tank Whisperer, and she's amazing, and you should totally check her stuff out. And other than that, we will be back next month with another tank.
Take care all and be safe.
Okay, and as we go out, before you all log out, if you haven't seen it, I'm now going to play our little highlights reel from the Tank Festival, and it's pretty cool. So, here we go. Okay, so I'm in the side hatch of the Panzer IV J, and we are about to do a lap. Panzer IV J, doing a lap. Friends.
Sport vehicle, Tiny Teddy. I'm assuming it's an X2 cav vehicle as a recon vehicle. It's quite possible it's a 157 RAR. It's one of their recon platoon vehicles, but we'll see.